Hey everyone, Nike here. I wanted to make a video on 5 tips you and your raid group can do to improve your raiding and hopefully make your progression easier or your farm run smoother. Without further introduction, let's get on to the first tip. Tip number 1, put the Druid in a subgroup with the rest of the team. It doesn't matter if you're using a healer Druid, a DPS Druid, an Oromancer, Tempest, healer, or something even crazier. I see many teams with a subgroup of 5, and then another group of 4, and then a healer off alone in some third group. Simply put, this hurts your team. The way Squad UI works is that heals are not prioritized by subgroup, so you don't gain any healing benefit by having your healer off alone. But by having him alone, you do lose a bunch of DPS. Why is that? In the case of a Druid, the Druid himself isn't getting the same amount of buffs as he would if he was a member of a subgroup. Secondly, the buffs from the Druid Spirit, Spotter, Grace of the Land, etc. is being distributed randomly and not being allocated to the players who could make the best use of them. These buffs are major DPS increases, and they should be prioritized on the players who are going to achieve maximal DPS with them. Putting the Druid into a subgroup is a simple change, but one that will increase your team's overall DPS in a significant way without hurting your ability to heal at all. Alright guys, tip number 2. Buff overkill is just as bad as not buffing enough. I see many teams using a Phalanx Strength Warrior with Strength Runes, golden fried dumplings, bountiful sharpening stones, and the Facet of Nature from a Revenant. Oh, and the Revenant himself is stacking might by camping Facet of Strength on Glint. To keep it really simple, you can only make 25 might stacks. More than that is overkill. Sure, some of it will bleed over to the other subgroup, but if your other subgroup doesn't have enough might without that bleed over, something's wrong with your team comp. By over-focusing on might generation, or any other buff, you're wasting DPS. In less organized teams with no Revenant, the warrior might need to go full ham on might creation, but it pays for players to look at their team comp and think critically about how much DPS they need to sacrifice in order to generate sufficient might. Oftentimes, the warrior in your group can switch to DPS food instead of golden fried dumplings without hurting the team's might stacks one bit. And the result is a 3 to 5% DPS increase for himself for free. I think you would find that more often than not, people are letting their fear of being underbuffed cause them to overbuff, and what's happening is the end result is they have lower overall DPS for it because they're overcompensating for the fear of being underbuffed. So don't do it. Tip number 3, not dying is more important than DPS. This isn't strictly true if you're a hardcore guild going for record times on boss kills, but for 99% of groups out there who are just struggling to do their first time through the raid and progressing and trying to get the raid on farm for their weekly rewards, it is vastly more important for you to focus on the mechanics and your positioning than it is to worry about perfect DPS rotations. When I watch streams of some other guilds doing raid pulls, I often see people dying to tunnel vision because they're over-focusing on DPS, or they're taking hugely unnecessary risks in order to squeeze out a trivial amount of extra DPS. Again, I want to stress that taking big risks for DPS is okay if your goal is trying to get a speed kill and your team is planning on wiping a lot in order to get the speed kill time they want on the boss. But for a casual group or a bunch of first-timers struggling through progression, it is so much more important to make your priority the boss mechanics. A good example for inexperienced players are the green AoE circles at Veil Guardian. Players who are assigned to the quote-unquote green team will often tunnel vision on boss DPS and be too late to the green circle and cause their party to wipe. In that particular boss encounter, the enraged timer is generous enough that you can comfortably kill the boss without the 4 players on the green team contributing any DPS. If your team is struggling on this particular mechanic due to tunnel vision, one trick you can do is have the green team members unequip their weapons for a pull or two and have them literally be unable to attack the boss, so they cannot tunnel vision on anything except the green AoE. And watch how that will improve your runs. Once they are comfortable getting to the green circle on time and they understand that they need to be focusing on the green circle and not DPS, those guys have earned their weapons back. And you can give them their weapons back, and then you can proceed to kill the boss with a much faster time. Alright guys, tip 4 is take scheduled breaks. I cannot stress the importance, especially during progression, of not wasting people's time. If a different person on the team goes AFK after each pull, it will slow you down so much so that by the time the end of the night hits, you will have done substantially fewer boss pulls. Even worse, it compounds when a second person says, well, if Joe left, I'm gonna leave and go grab some food and be back in 5 minutes. Then he goes AFK and the first guy comes back and now you're waiting for the second player. The best practice that a team can do is agree to take all their breaks together at set times, such as saying, okay, every 30 minutes, or whatever the nearest end of the nearest pull is, we all take a 5-minute break together. Barring any emergency, you can stick to that. This will maximize your playtime and give your team the least aggravation when dealing with the break situation. Tip number 5, it isn't your team comp, it's player fails. When I watch less experienced teams wipe repeatedly, it usually doesn't take long before someone in TeamSpeak says, we should bring X profession instead of Y profession. Almost always, people are looking for a quick fix to the difficult problem of certain players failing the mechanics. If you're dying because you failed to get into the green AoE at Veilguard, it has nothing to do with your comp. It has to do with your players. What you shouldn't do is give in to the temptation to change your team comp around in order to make some quick fix that will try to cover for the people who aren't learning as fast as everyone else. Often, a comp change won't solve this problem, and even if it does, it won't help the slow person improve as a player, and you'll be back to suffering their slow learning on the next boss. So, those are my 5 raid tips, guys. I hope they were helpful for you guys, and if you have any tips of your own to share, or any questions about these comments, or these tips, please feel free to hit me up in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys here for the next video. Thanks again.